I have this day, March the 4th of 1869, taken the oath of office to be the President of these United States. And I should like to emphasize these United States. It is my desire and pleasure that I should speak to you now and deliver to you the inaugural address that I gave this day on the east portico of the Capitol building, Chief Justice Salmon Chase administering the oath. It's only 35 words, very brief message with a great responsibility. The address has already been both praised and criticized. It is, and I'm aware of this, the shortest address yet given of my 17 predecessors. And some people have said it is a statement of succinct and cogent intellect with great portents for our country. Other people have said, like Charles Francis Adams, that it is one sophistic, boring colloquialism after another linked together with verbs, and mercifully brief. So in my first day in office, I've already experienced the two ends of the continuum. I suspect it will always be so. But I should like to read to you what I said on the east portico of the Capitol building at noon today. Citizens of the United States, your suffrages have elected me to the office of the President of the United States. I have, in conformity to the Constitution of our country, taken this oath without mental reservation and with the determination to do, to the best of my ability, all that is required of me. The responsibilities of the position I feel, but accept them without fear. The office has come to me unsought. I bring to it a conscious desire and determination to fill it to the best of my ability, to the satisfaction of the people, and I commence its duties untrammeled. On all leading questions agitating the public mind, I will always express my views to Congress and urge them according to my judgment, and when I think it advisable, I will exercise the constitutional privilege of interposing a veto to defeat measures which I oppose. But all laws will be faithfully executed, whether they meet my approval or not. I shall on all subjects have a policy to recommend, but none to enforce against the will of the people. Laws are to govern all alike, those opposed as well as those who favor them. I know no method to secure the repeal of bad or obnoxious laws so effective as their stringent execution. The country having just emerged from a great rebellion, many questions will come before it for settlement in the next 4 years, which preceding administrations have never had to deal with. In meeting these, it is desirable that they should be approached calmly, without prejudice, hate, or sectional pride, remembering that the greatest good to the greatest number is the object to be attained. This requires security of person, property, and free religious and political opinion in every part of our common country without regard to local prejudice. All laws to secure these ends will receive my best efforts for their enforcement. A great deal has been contracted in securing to us and our posterity the Union. The payment of this, principal and interest, as well as the return to a specie basis, as soon as it can be accomplished without material detriment to the debtor class or to the country at large, must be provided for. To protect the national honor, every dollar of government indebtedness should be paid in gold, unless otherwise expressly stipulated in the contract. Let it be understood that no repudiator of 1 farthing of our public debt will be trusted in public place, and it will go far toward strengthening a credit which ought to be the best in the world, and will ultimately enable us to replace the debt with bonds bearing less interest than we now pay. To this should be added a faithful collection of the revenue, a strict accountability to the Treasury for every dollar collected, and the greatest practicable retrenchment in expenditure in every department of government. When we compare the paying capacity of our country now with the 10 states in poverty from the effects of the war, but soon to emerge, I trust, into greater prosperity than ever before, with its paying capacity 25 years ago, and calculate what it probably will be 25 years hence, who can doubt the feasibility of paying every dollar then with more ease than we now pay for useless luxuries? Why, it looks as though Providence had bestowed upon us a strong box in the precious metals locked up in the sterile mountains of the far west, and which we are now forging the key to unlock, to meet the very contingency that is now upon us. Ultimately, it may be necessary to ensure the facilities to reach these riches, and it may be necessary also that the general government should give its aid to secure this access. But that should only be when a dollar of obligation to pay secures precisely the same sort of dollar to use now and not before. Whilst the question of specie payments is in abeyance, the prudent businessman is careful about contracting debts payable in the distant future. The nation should follow the same rule. A prostrate commerce is to be rebuilt and all industries encouraged. The young men of the country, those who from their age must be its rulers 25 years hence, have a peculiar interest in maintaining the national honor. A moment's reflection as to what will be our commanding influence among the nations of the earth in their day, if they are only true to themselves, should inspire them with national pride. All divisions, geographical, political, and religious, can join in this common sentiment. How the public debt is to be paid or specie payments resumed is not so important as that a plan should be adopted and acquiesced in. A united determination to do is worth more than divided counsels upon the method of doing. Legislation upon this subject may not be necessary now or even advisable, but it will be when the civil law is more fully restored in all parts of the country and trade resumes its wonted channels. It will be my endeavor to execute all laws in good faith, to collect all revenues assessed, and to have them properly accounted for and economically disbursed. I will, to the best of my ability, appoint to office those only who will carry out this design. In regard to foreign policy, I would deal with nations as equitable laws require individuals to deal with each other. And I would protect the law-abiding citizen, whether of native or foreign birth. Wherever his rights are jeopardized or the flag of our country floats, I would respect the rights of all nations, demanding equal respect for our own. If others depart from this rule in their dealings with us, we may be compelled to follow their precedent. The proper treatment of the original occupants of this land, the Indians, is one deserving of careful study. I will favor any course toward them which tends to their civilization and ultimate citizenship. The question of suffrage is one which is likely to agitate the public so long as a portion of the citizens of the nation are excluded from its privileges in any state. It seems to me very desirable that this question should be settled now, and I entertain the hope and express the desire that it may be the ratification of the 15th article of amendment to the Constitution. In conclusion, I ask patient forbearance one toward another throughout the land, and a determined effort on the part of every citizen to do his share toward cementing a happy union. And I ask the prayers of the nation to Almighty God in behalf of this consummation. I took the oath of office on the annotated paragraph Bible, published by the Religious Tract Society of London, published in 1861. It was open to Psalm 121, the first verse of which is, I will lift up mine eyes into the hills, from whence cometh my help. The Bible was given to Julia by Chief Justice Salmon Chase after he administered the oath of office, and it is now securely in Julia's possession. She allowed me to bring it for this occasion. And that is my brief, but I think succinct inaugural address. I'd like to point out that today the rain cleared off at about noon, just before I took the oath. It had been raining all night and into the day. 11 inches of rain, I'm told, fell last night in the early part of this day. And the temperature was about 40 degrees when I took the oath of office. And there will be an inaugural ball in the Treasury building, which will be underway when I leave your company here in the rectangle office and attend that ball. Julia is looking forward to it with great anticipation. She loves the music and the dancing. I loathe the music and I do not dance, but I will be present and celebrate this great day. There are several issues on my mind that I am going to work with great assiduity to bring to pass. There is a bill that's on my desk now that was passed just a few days ago, the act to enable public credit. And it is the bill to ensure public credit that will ensure that, as I said in the inaugural address, to pay all contracts with gold. Now, you see, the issue is that during the war, the government ran up a national debt. Our national debt, as I address you this day, is $2.8 billion, up from the national debt in 1860 of $64 million. So in the 4 years of war and the 4 years after the war in the previous administration under President Johnson, we have run up a $2.8 billion debt. That is from the war. That is not the responsibility of President Johnson. But our debt in 1860 was 64 millions of dollars. Now it is very nearly 3 billions of dollars. There is much activity, has been much activity in Congress by the Democrats to want to resume the publishing, the printing of greenbacks. Now, as you well know, greenbacks were paper currency printed in the press of the war when the country desperately needed cash in the economy. The fundamental, total, complete problem with greenbacks is that they are not backed by specie or gold. They're not backed by anything but faith in the government of the United States. Greenbacks have no fiscal monetary backing. They are, in essence, worthless. But for the faith of citizens that our government is good for its money and its debts. I have already talked with Secretary of Treasury, my appointee, George Boutwell, and we have a plan to reduce the greenbacks in circulation. And every time greenbacks are removed from circulation, the value of the currency rises, the value of our standing economically, domestically, and foreign rises. Now, we're in a financial crunch, and the Democrats are advocating reprinting $100 million of greenbacks and putting them into the economy. I feel this would be a mistake, and the Act to Ensure Public Credit will stop that. We will pay our debts in gold that were contracted. Some contracts, governmental contracts, were written such that some could be repaid in gold, some in greenbacks or otherwise. Those contracts will be met under those terms. But we are going to pay our debts in gold. We are not going to flood the economy with another $100 million in worthless greenbacks based solely on the faith of our government, for I fear that would diminish the faith of the people in our government. We're going to pay in gold what we contracted for in assuming a debt, primarily to finance the war. I'm also going to sign immediately an executive order that guarantees government employees or contractors working for the government for an 8-hour day, and they will be paid what they were paid for a 10 or 12-hour day. In June of '68, Congress passed a bill that limited the workday for the federal government or people contracting with the government to 8 hours a day, but they turned around and reduced the pay. And I'm going to stop that. I'm going to issue an executive order that people or contractors working for the government employees as well, will be paid for that 8-hour day what they were being paid for the 10 or the 12-hour day. I'm also going to urge and sign legislation that separates the property of women from the debts of their husbands. So women will not be enslaved to their husbands economically, and it will also guarantee and give women the right to sue in court, which they have not had. I'm going to sign an executive order that creates equality for all Blacks, all citizens within the District of Columbia, and I'm going to do it immediately. The issues facing us are multiple, but they are not insurmountable. For example, there is much angst. I specifically mentioned the Indians, the Native American, and I am not surprised that has kicked up some furor. I'm the first president to address Indians in an inaugural address, indeed, to much of in any way to address Indians. But we've got an ongoing problem in how we are dealing with the Indians, the first residents of our country. They're not even citizens at this time. And I know full well that issue because Ely Parker, General Ely Parker, my good friend, Seneca Sachem chieftain, who is an attorney and who could not practice law once he studied and read law, passed the bar because he was not a citizen. Then he became an engineer. The man's brilliant. He deserves, and all his people, all Indians deserve a far better treatment than they are receiving at our hands. We need to stop the bloodshed and we need to stop the war. As I speak to you, there are more than 250,000 Native Americans in this country in more than 100 tribes operating under 370 different treaties. That the 370 different treaties alone is unmanageable. The Indians on the reservations, and I feel they need to be on reservations because the inexorable march westward of pioneers, if we don't do something definitively to protect our Indians, our original citizens, they're going to be exterminated. That's why I support reservations. Not to pin them up, corral them up, and get them out of the way, but to protect them, because if we don't take substantial efforts, they're going to be exterminated. And that's a tragedy that I will not countenance. They're not well supplied. I'm going to advocate that an Indian could be established, multiple members, and I'm going to set that up with, first of all, Ely Parker, General Ely Parker. What an original idea. An Indian himself is going to be the commissioner, the first commissioner. And I hope he holds that office for a long time. And the rest of the commission is going to be made up of clergy and leaders in different churches, because I think preachers will be more honest than contractors working trading posts and reservation sutlers and supplies. It's already, my early talking about it, it's already being, I'm thinking perhaps sneeringly referred to as my Quaker plan, my Quaker policy. But that's all right. I can stand that criticism if it results in better treatment and distribution of supplies and necessary goods for Indians on reservations. The issue of our standing in the world as for the first time, a world member of the community of nations. That's an unintended result of the war, because the industrial strength, the Industrial Revolution was already roaring by the time 1861 came and the firing on Fort Sumter. But with almost 3 million men serving in the United States Army and some 50,000 serving in the Navy, going from 66 vessels in the Navy to 650 or more vessels, and all of this in 4 years. Our industrial wherewithal exploded to supply, clothe, and even feed those very hungry armies and arm those soldiers and sailors. An unintended result was that we now have the biggest, strongest, fieriest industrial economy and wherewithal in the world. Another unintended result of the war was we now have a two-ocean navy. In chasing rebel raiders, and I'll address the Alabama claims in a moment, but in our chasing rebel raiders over 2 oceans, we grew that 650 plus vessel navy, and now we have a 2-ocean navy. And we're going to keep it. And we're a very powerful, we've also got the largest standing army in the world. So militarily, we are very powerful, but more importantly, for our purposes, economically, we are the wealthiest, strongest, most powerful nation on earth, and the other nations in the community of nations around the globe are all looking somewhat puzzled and taken aback. Well, indeed, the United States is a force, a community member to be reckoned with now. And we are going to develop and stroke and care for that status. I want international business to grow because it will benefit everyone in the country. But let's go back to paying for obligations. Our foreign neighbors who want to sell us goods are watching very closely. How are we going to handle this new status? And that's why I am absolutely adamant. We are going to be good for our money, and we're going to pay it in gold if that's what the customer, the seller wants, the merchant. So we're going to grow our economy. Another issue is the Alabama claims. London bears responsibility for that. They knew what was going on with Laird and Sons shipping in Liverpool. They knew full well what was going on. And we know they knew full well what was going on. The Alabama and its sister ships, for example, completely extinguished an industry, whale oil, because they were sinking or burning every whaling vessel in either ocean. Whale oil became unavailable. And a fellow in Pennsylvania by the name of Rockefeller has switched over, taking advantage of this, and is developing petroleum products to burn in lamps. There are millions of lamps and lanterns across our country that have to burn something. They can't burn whale oil because the rebel raiders completely extinguished the supply of whale oil. So that was another unintended result. The death of one industry, the birth of another. And the petroleum industry has, I would think, great potential at this time. We'll have to see what happens. But the Alabama claims are a very tender point. There are some people, hotheads, who are demanding war with Britain. Well, let's go to war with Britain. And I say no, definitively no, because I will tell you, I know that Britain does not want war with us. They privately have conceded, yes, they bear some responsibility, and they want to work out this issue. So hopefully in the next year or so, we'll be able to establish a treaty and go forth from there and work out a resolution to the Alabama claims and put that last monster under the bed that is still hanging over from the war. But you should know, too many people do not. There is a severe problem with Canadian American fishing rights off Newfoundland, Nova Scotia. The Canadians and the American fishermen indeed have fired at each other. There's been bloodshed, there's been death over who can fish where in those richest in the world, as I understand, fishing grounds. So we need to work. We've got to resolve a treaty with fishing rights. And that will be part of the negotiations involved with the Alabama claims. Another issue with our neighbors to the north in Canada, there are some, I will tell you, in the vernacular, there's some mighty hot folks up there in Canada and some mighty hot folks in England over the Irish, the Fenian Brotherhood. Those fellas are going across the border into Canada and wreaking great havoc, killing, bloodshed has resulted. And what they're trying to do is get England out of Ireland by apparently starting a war. Yes, they've approached our government and myself about supporting, because now they're in the northern part of our country, going across the border into Canada and coming back. And the Canadians have a legitimate complaint, and they have been heard. The British have a legitimate complaint, and they too have been heard. I'm not going to countenance the Fenian Brotherhood hiding under the protection, the inadvertent and unintentioned protection of our government and good offices, for them to go across the border and kill Canadians and try to start a war. That is not going to happen. So I've got to address the issue of the Fenian Brotherhood. And we're working on all three of those: the Alabama claims, the fishing rights, the Fenian Brotherhood. We want to get along with our Canadian neighbors. We've got the longest unfortified border in the world, and we want to keep it unfortified, and we want to remain friends with our Canadian neighbors. We also are eager to remain friends with our British neighbors, and they are, I will assure you, equally as anxious to maintain a good relationship with us. I feel that with both Canadians and British, we have a bright future and are going to cultivate good and strong friends now and into the future. With the issue of money and enfranchisement of voters, with the end of the war, we had 4 million of people formerly enslaved, now free. The 13th Amendment, it made slavery illegal. The 14th Amendment just recently ratified, made blacks, former slaves, citizens. And just last week, I believe the 26th of March, or February rather, the 15th Amendment was sent to the states for ratification. I fervently hope the 15th Amendment is ratified, for it will give black men enfranchisement. They need to have the right to vote. All men should have the right to vote. Indeed, 400,000 free blacks voted for me in this election, and I won by 300,000 popular vote majority. So their enfranchisement, if nothing else politically, is important to anybody interested in running for office. And I carried 6 of the former Confederate states. I carried all of New England, all of the Midwest. I garnered 280 of the 294 electoral votes. So we need to be sure the 15th Amendment is ratified, and I sincerely, fervently hope it is ratified as soon as is possible, if not sooner. Give black men the right to vote. And the other, as I've addressed earlier, is the monetary issue. All of these greenbacks that are in circulation, George Boutwell, Secretary of the Treasury, if approved, and I think he will be, and I have the plan to draw down and pull the greenbacks out of circulation and destroy them. And we are not going to issue more worthless paperbacks or greenbacks. We're not going to do that. That's not healthy for our economy. So I'm working on the 15th Amendment. I will urge its ratification by states, and I'm working on the stability of gold in our country. Now, or the stability of our economy via gold and specie. So I'm working on economic stability. I'm working on Indian treatment and reform. I'm working on Reconstruction to try to get the black man the right to vote. I want a stronger to sustain our now newfound status as a world community member, global village. And I want to address the Ku Klux Klan. They're already kicking up a problem. Now, that may result in 2 things for me, my friends. The first is, if I have to, make no mistake, any who listen to me, do not mistake my intent nor the tone of my voice, for it echoes the intent and the steel in my character. I will not countenance any organization, Ku Klux Klan, Knight Rider, or anyone else to disturb, murder, kill, or in any other way to interfere with the voting and of black men when they get it from the 15th Amendment, and the peace and well-being of property and life of anyone in any part of the country. And if I have to, I will suspend the writ of habeas corpus. And if necessary, to deal with these problems that are national in scope, I will create a Justice Department and have the Attorney General, who is now the president's personal attorney. I will put him in charge as the chief legal officer in this nation. and we will deal with people who are harassing, hurting, killing, or disturbing, or in any other way causing problems to our new citizens, those newly enfranchised or newly freed and soon to be enfranchised former slaves. I will do what must be done. Now, having made those statements, given you the inaugural address and covered what I hope to achieve, I will now entertain questions. Mr. Movius.
Mr. President, Jerry would like to know, regarding the length of your address, he says brevity is the soul of wit. And he would like to know what your reaction to Andrew Johnson not being in attendance for your inauguration.
That did not disturb me because, first of all, I refused to ride to the inauguration in the same carriage with Andrew Johnson. And when President Johnson was told this, he was miffed and said, well, I won't go at all. And when I was told that, I said, well, that doesn't disturb me at all. I think Andrew Johnson needs to go back to Greenville, Tennessee, and stay there.
All right. Mr. President, Rex would like to know, who was your opponent and did you campaign?
Rachel Seymour and Frank Blair, and I had Skylar Koufax with me, the tanner from, I think, South Bend, Indiana, claims him. So the tanner and the cobbler, Seymour, former governor of New York. But Seymour had a problem. It kept coming up in the campaign that he had addressed the rioters in New York City in July of '63 as my friends. That didn't sit well, and it kept coming back. A problem that I had that kept coming back was my orders number 11 about expelling Jews as a class back in '62. But Rabbi Schneersham, the leading rabbi in the country in New York City, applauded my appointing of a Jew to the Trade Commission. I appointed the first Jew to a cabinet level position that's ever been done. So Rabbi Schneersham said, this demonstrates General Grant's angst and his true character. He does not have a problem with Jews, and I do not. I will have to say that Julia told me back in December of '62, when I issued orders number 11, she said, you're going to regret that, don't do it. And I did do it, and I have regretted it every day of my life. That is not the content of my character, nor the content of my heart. The campaign was a non-campaign. Actually, I went out west with Fred and Sheridan and Sherman and the Archduke of Russia hunting buffalo from the trains. I went back to Galena occasionally during the campaign. Elihu Washburn had a telegraph office set up in the parlor of his home, which is where I got the election results. So our campaign was essentially a non-campaign. But those are two issues that came up. Seymour having the weight of addressing the people that were killing scores of blacks in New York City as his friends, and I had the problem of having ordered Jews as a class out of my military district, much of the Western Theater.
Brian says you are the first president to have both his parents alive at the time of his inauguration. Did both parents attend your inaugural?
No, sir. Neither one of my parents attended my inaugural. My father would not come because my father-in-law is a former slave owner. My parents did not attend our wedding either. But neither of my parents attended my inauguration. My mother says she will never come to Washington City, and mother pretty generally does what she says. And my father says, if I come, I ain't staying at that White House where your father-in-law is. I'll stay in Willard's Hotel. And we'll see. But but he's already forsworn staying at the White House. Now, my father-in-law, Colonel Dent, who was very fond of telling me and anyone he could stop on the road or the sidewalk that I was never going to amount to anything, and told his daughter not to marry me, I can't keep him out of the White House. He's already talking about actually moving in, and I have no doubt that he will do so, but that's Colonel Dent. But no, neither of my parents came to my inaugural.
Someone by the name of Mike would like to know, should the federal government pay down the debt incurred on behalf of the Confederate States?
That remains to be seen. I am not prepared to give that answer. There are two very vocal and very credible arguments there, sides of that argument. I would rather not give a committing answer to that. I think that what will probably happen is we will pay to keep the peace and try to make the scar tissue less red and raw, and to enhance our standing with the international community with debts that were obligated. We may very well land somewhere in the middle. And I'm working with great assiduity here, not to sound like politician blatherskite. I'm trying to give a sincere answer, and I think I've given one.
Thank you, Mr. President. Michelle asks, how long did you spend drafting your inaugural speech?
Several hours. An interesting note about that is I had to hide it from Julia. She kept asking me, where's your inaugural address? I want to read it. And I said, no, ma'am. And she was aghast. And she said, but I must read it. And I must not. Well, why can't I read it, Liz? And I said, because you'll change it. And I don't want to change it. I like it the way it is. So I had to carry it with me in my breast pocket at all times. And Julia fussed and groused about it and gave me no end of a bad time. Domestic bliss was interrupted. She was serious. She wanted to read that speech, but she didn't hear it until you heard it.
All right. Rena says, speaking of relatives in attendance, was your father-in-law, Colonel Dent, in attendance? It must have been quite an experience for him if he was considering the opinion that he once held regarding how well his eldest daughter did in her choice of husband.
Well, it crossed my mind a time or two that day. Earlier today, thoughts came across my mind of scattering very rapidly. I had a lot of other things of more weighty content on my mind, but the man that Colonel Dent said would never amount to anything, that was just approaching trifling, that he didn't want his daughter to marry, that he would, and during the war, he said, I'll shoot him on sight if I see him. Now he's in the audience with me taking the oath of office of the highest office in the land. And I keep thinking, Crow. But I haven't said anything to him, nor will I, but it crossed my mind. I'd love to, if not give him a plate, at least mutter when I walk past him, Crow. But yes, he was there.
Roger says, congratulations, Mr. President. I have heard a rumor that shortly we will be able to be paid in gold for the bonds we bought during the war. I believe it will be called the Public Credit Act. Is that correct?
That is correct. That is correct. Now, I haven't seen it yet, but it has been passed, and I am going to sign it as rapidly as I can. All debts will be paid in gold. We are going to be known both internally, domestically, and internationally as good for our money.
Tom asks, how will you maintain the freedom of the formerly enslaved people?
That is a thorny question, and I think it is going to be an ongoing infected issue. The formerly enslaved people, we have 4 million of people. I had at one time in the last 4 years actually advocated perhaps rolling emancipation and educate them and teach them to read and write before actually getting freedom. Now, that advocacy was roundly shouted down, and I understand the opposition to it. It would have been impossible to, by degrees, free 4 million people. But the issue we've got is you've got 4 million people who can't read or write, who have never had to fend for themselves, have no concept of making a living and paying bills, just the economics of life. And they're being preyed upon by former slave masters. There are organizations such as the Ku Klux Klan that have organized. There are night riders in every state in the South. And I'm going to deal with it as best I can and as succinctly as I can. I alluded to the possibility of creating a Justice Department, and I feel that that's going to be a necessity. Because you see now, the harassment of former slaves is a local issue. If someone's hanged or someone is harmed or beaten, if someone's home is burned, it's a local issue. But with the 15th Amendment, giving them the right to vote and saying, therefore, you can't interfere with someone's right to vote, that makes it federal. That makes it where I can deal with it from on high. And make no mistake, I will create a Justice Department. I will send troops to the South. I will suspend the writ of habeas corpus. We've got 4 million people who do not know how to protect themselves and being preyed upon mercilessly. And I'm going to do all I can to address that.
Frank says the men of the 21st Illinois give 3 huzzas.
My first command, indeed.
There you go.
Just 8 short years ago.
Craig asks, as a follow-up, how will you instruct military governors in promoting the equitable treatment of freedmen?
I'm going to tell them that they've got a free hand in how they do what they do. I'm not going to purport to manage them from the executive mansion. I'm going to see that men who are proven leaders and successful military men are in charge of the 5 military districts of the South. Hopefully, I will not have heavy-handed martial rule. Hopefully. But if I do, I will address that, replace those leaders. I will keep the management in those positions of men who are fair and equitable and have the best interests of all the citizens, not just the newly freed slaves. They certainly have perhaps the most difficult plight to live with, but the white citizens as well, they're being preyed upon as well in some cases about who they vote for. So my emphasis is going to be, let's protect everyone and bring life, a better life, to everyone. And I will do whatever I must do.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, continue to keep your microphones muted. Michelle would like to know, did you have any concerns that your inaugural speech would not be understood by the uneducated citizens of the country?
No, I didn't. I think that what I said is very clear, and that's one of the reasons I kept it brief. I'm not a speech maker. I loathe making speeches. And that, in fact, it's been said more than a couple of times that my inaugural address succinctly proved I am not a public speaker, nor am I a writer of any degree. But I think it was well understood. I kept it simple. I kept it short. And I believe it is at any level clear and understandable by anyone, regardless of their level of education, because education does not indicate lack of intellect. Make no mistake, because a man's not educated doesn't mean he's not sharp, not pretty smart. So I think everyone will understand what I said.
Rosemary says, Mr. President, how did you go about selecting the members of your cabinet?
I did not. I am somewhat rueful in telling you I did not consult the party leaders, specifically Charles Sumner and Thad Stevens, and they were shocked today when they came to my office and Charles Sumner reaches in his waistcoat pocket and gave me a list and said, "Here's your cabinet." And I said, "I have already selected my cabinet." The look on his face was priceless. And he said, "I beg your pardon." And I said, "I've already selected my cabinet without consultation with the rest of us, without talking to any of us." And in essence, I said to him, I didn't think I needed to consult with you or anyone else. I selected men that I have to work with that I feel best suited for the office. And that's whom I have selected. I do not take your list that you've given me. And he really he wants to be Secretary of State. But given what I encountered today, I don't think he's going to make Secretary of State. But I selected the people that I felt would do a good job.
All right.
One of them, though, I'm having trouble with Mr. Stewart, who founded Stewart's Department Store. He's the wealthiest he's one of the wealthiest men in the country, but he's certainly the wealthiest mercantile person in the country. He's credited with developing the concept of the department store. And I nominated him to be Secretary of the Treasury, but there's becoming some resistance to that, saying there's a 1791 federal law that said no one who's a merchant can be the Secretary of the Treasury. I'm going to ask for special dispensation from Congress for that. Approved, I'll go with George Boutwell, whom I have been in talks with already.
Jerry asked, "What say you about your opponent, Governor Seymour's campaign motto? This is a white man's country, let white men rule."
I think that's regrettable. I believe that a very sad statement that here in 1869 that anyone should espouse that kind of belief. This is an every person's country. This is a country for all citizens, both the newly freed and the ones that have been here since the country began. And I would remind Governor Seymour that our country holds a unique place in history in being the only country really in history that's been totally populated from outside the country coming in with immigrants, except for the Indians, who were the first citizens who were here welcoming the other immigrants. But succinctly, essentially, we are a nation of immigrants. We're the only nation in history that's been almost totally populated by people coming from outside in.
Mike Hoover wants to know, what led you to select Schuyler Colfax as your vice president?
That was suggested to me by the party. I was nominated back in '68 by 650 delegates, and I'm proud of being unanimously nominated. One ballot, one vote, unanimously. Schuyler Colfax was the person brought to me and was the suggestion to balance the ticket and to add some substantial weight to the ticket. So that's how Schuyler Colfax got on the ticket, and I'm proud of it. I like Schuyler Colfax. He's a very sound legislator and politician. He'll be a credit to my administration.
John says the British aided the Confederate privateers in destroying our merchant fleet. Will you push for reparations?
Yes, I will. The British, they've acknowledged their culpability. The British have they stepped up and said, yes, we need to talk about this. They privately said, no, we don't want a war. We will work something out to the satisfaction of the United States. And I'm confident that will happen. And I'm pushing for that even after I took the inauguration. I've got initial talks with people to bring about a resolution of the Alabama claims, because there are a lot of people willing to go to war with Britain over this.
Beth would like to know, which generals did you send to represent you at Lincoln's second inaugural? Also, Is it true that Andrew Johnson stayed at the White House until noon and refused to attend?
I didn't, as I recall, I didn't send any particular generals to the second inauguration of Mr. Lincoln. I was too busy fighting the war and in pursuit of Lee. I believe some did go who had the few that had any kind of leave to get away. President Johnson is, one could say, President Johnson, and that's all one needs to say. He was miffed with me. He didn't want to come to the inauguration anyway, I don't believe. But I absolutely refused to ride from the executive mansion to the inauguration in the same carriage with Andrew Johnson. I said, I'll not do it. And when President Johnson was told that, I suspect he was relieved, because he wouldn't have to ride with me. And it also gave him the excuse to say, well, I just won't go at all. So that was fine with me. And I think at the end of the day, we were both happy.
David would like to know, may I ask how you met Ely Parker, and how did he happen to become a member of your staff?
I met Ely Parker in Galena, Illinois in 1860. Which prompts me to say I'm not from Galena, Illinois. They're good people and it's a wonderful town, but I only lived in Galena for 11 months. From May of 60 to April of 61. I left Galena on April 25th of 61 and never lived there since. I've maintained a residence, but I've lived all over the war theaters and then Washington City. But Ely Parker was an engineer for the government. In fact, he designed and built the post office in Galena, Illinois, which I think to this day is still there and in use. And I came to know Ely Parker. It's not Eli. He corrected me on that. He spells it E-L-Y, and it's pronounced Ely. He said the Eli is spelled E-L-I. And I said, and he said, Captain Grant. And I said, just so. So Ely Parker fascinated me with who he was and how he was. And the fact that he had been a Sachem chieftain, went to the White House when he was only 14 years old as an interpreter for, I believe it was Red Jacket of the Seneca tribes to 5 civilized nations. So he had experience in the executive mansion as a teenager. Then he read law and went to go to the bar, and he passed his exam, his bar query, but they wouldn't let him become an attorney because he wasn't an American citizen. Then he studied engineering, became an accomplished engineer. The man's brilliant. He also is a full-blooded chieftain in the Seneca Nation. And when the war started, I had him on my mind. About midway through the war, I think in 63, I realized, found out he was available, and he couldn't get into the war. He was not an American citizen. He was told, this is a white man's war. No, we don't need you. Well, when I heard about that, I said, I believe I can use you. And I got him on my staff. Now, this man couldn't practice law because he was an Indian. He couldn't even join the army because he was an Indian. But I saw to it that he got on my personal staff and was my personal secretary, and in fact was in the room at the surrender, and in his handwriting, in ink, wrote the terms of surrender for General Lee to surrender the Army of Northern Virginia. And I believe he kept a copy for himself.
Good for him. Rosemary asks, given your very enlightened view of our first citizens, how did Sheridan and Sherman of the only good Indian is a dead Indian come to lead the official contact between the federal government and the nations of Indians?
Well, Sheridan made that statement, or it's rumored that he made that statement. I think if he did say something that harsh and strident, it is regrettable. That is not my position. Sherman is not well disposed toward Indians, but I'm going to work with both of them, because if they remain in command, they will obey my orders and my directives and fulfill what it is that I want to happen. Both of them have antipathy toward the Indian, and we're going to have to get them, if not over it, past it. My policies will be enforced. A more humane treatment of Indians is going to be the normal state of affairs for Indians.
Tom's asked, do you have any reservations about the possibilities that the Central Pacific and Union Pacific will interfere with Indian lands?
Well, General Dodge, Grenville Dodge, who was my spy chief during the war, and in fact had somewhere between 200 and 100, I think closer to 200 spies. He's the only, regrettably, he's the man who hanged Sam Davis, and did not want to. But he refused to tell me, even when I was general in chief. I asked him, how many spies have you got? And he said, I'm not telling you. Well, and of course, I then asked him, who are they? He said, I'm not telling you who they are. I'll tell no one. And he said he's going to go to his grave being the only man who knew who his spies were. But after the war, he reverted back to his profession of being an engineer on the railroad. He's not the engineer that drives the train. He builds the railroad. And he's telling me that within a couple of months that the Transcontinental Railroad is going to be finished somewhere out in Utah. He said projections are someplace prominent Utah, preeminent Utah, promontory Utah. I don't recall what the name of the town is, but he's saying the way they're building now, they're going to meet at that town in Utah, and it's going to be sometime in May. I don't think they can do it, but he's saying that's the case. The impact that it is going to have on the Indian, I don't know. They call it the singing wire. I'm hoping that with the advent of civilization, they will become civilized and become American citizens with our traditions and our customs and assimilate into our way of life. Because, and I do not intend to sound harsh when I say this, it is not my meaning, but whether they want it or not, our way of life is going to prevail all across the country. And if they accept and become as us and assimilate, they will be much the better off for it. I hope the Transcontinental Railroad brings them welfare and good things.
Bill says, George Washington led American forces to victory in order to assure the formation of our nation. You led Union forces to victory in order to restore our nation. Do you recognize the significance of this analogy?
Yes, I do. And I appreciate that analogy being lifted up for us in this meeting today. But I hasten to say, and I hope with appropriate and obvious humility, that is not for me to say. That's simply not for me to say. If others think that, that's good. But I must leave that to posterity and to those behind me as to the import of what we were all able to accomplish. You know, there were 3 million United States soldiers and 50,000 sailors. They won that war. It wasn't me.
Jerry says, I am sure that President Lincoln would have been most pleased with your program. Thank you and great job.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's always good to hear a kind word from you.
Conrad, who is in Ottawa, says, what was your opinion of Schuyler Colfax, your running mate?
Fine fellow. I like Schuyler Colfax. Beyond that, I won't go into any specifics. I thought he was an able and competent, experienced politician and legislator. and had the good of the nation at heart. I don't know him well, but I expect in the next 4 years I'll get to know him right well.
James would like to know, do you have any intention of appointing your family members, such as your brother Orville, to government position?
Yes, I'm going to appoint my father the postmaster of Bethel, Ohio. My brother Orville, Simpson died back in 61, just after the war started, and I could not attend his funeral. I was in West Tennessee. But Orville is evidencing some instability, some mental instability that portends poorly for him. But if I could find a place for him, I see nothing wrong with appointing him to a government job. Patronage, I'm going to champion a stringent civil rights system appointed on merit rather than patronage. But there are so many positions that I see no problem in appointing some of my family members who are competent to do the job to government positions.
Frank would like to know, looking back, would you have rather retained your original name, Hiram Ulysses
Grant? No, not really. Now, I never liked, and it was unintentional, and I have often mused with parents when they have children and are thinking about names. I've often told them over the years with a smile, whenever you name your child, whatever you name your child, always spell out their initials. Always think of what kind of nickname can result from what you name them, or in my case, Hiram Ulysses Grant spelled hug, and I knew I would be teased about that at the academy. So beyond that, telling parents and parents to be, just always look at your child's name. Write your child's name up and hold it up to a mirror and see how it looks written backwards, because people will do all manner of things with names. There's no telling where the public mind will go. With my name, I had changed it to Ulysses Hiram Grant and signed papers throughout my 4 years at the Academy as U.H. Grant or U. Hiram Grant, but it never took. And the issue was resolved of its own when the Academy put Ulysses S. Grant on my diploma, my certificate. So I let it go. It's one of those issues in life that there are more important things to worry about.
Sergeant Major says, Mr. President, congratulations. What are your plans now that you are president to relax and spend any of your free time?
A good smoke and reading the newspapers. I'm an avid reader, and I've always been a voracious reader, particularly of newspapers. And now holding the particular position I do, Sergeant Major, I think it incumbent upon me to exercise that to an even greater degree and read all manner of newspapers, particularly the English papers and other countries who have English editions of their papers. But a good smoke and a cup of coffee and a newspaper. And playing with my dog, Faithful. I've got a new dog, a Brittany. It's a new breed called a Brittany Spaniel, I think. Curly hair, big ears, pretty dog, Faithful. And that's what I like about the dog. It's faithful.
Dr. John says, short, sweet, and to the point. Doreen would like to know, what is your age today?
43. I'm the youngest president elected to date. I was born in 1822, and this is 1869. I'm 47. I have to remember my age. I'm always telling Julia I'm younger than I am, and she always laughs. But I'm the youngest president elected to date.
Catherine says, you are not a public speaker, my foot.
One must learn to do what one must do.
So Randy says, thank you, Mr. President, and congratulations on your inauguration. Mr. Barwick says, Mr. President, you have mentioned the fact that you will be planning to reduce debt occurred during the war and that many now free people are still poorly educated and or unable to work in the South. So are you planning to provide some form of financial aid or benefits to some way assist those to restart their lives during the time of Reconstruction, or will that not be a financial possibility at this time?
I have no plans to do that, to provide what would be criticized as the public dole. I have no plans to do that. Beyond that, that's an issue that is not going to be considered. I think that what we're trying to do down on the South Carolina coast with those folks down there, with the farms on the islands off the coast and in South Carolina, that's probably the closest to government program that we're going to get. I'm not going to get into the government supporting people.
Jerry says writing your memoirs would be a great thing to do.
I'll never write anything. I absolutely refuse to write anything. Nobody wants to read anything I've got to say. Moreover, all those other fellers out there that were generals and privates and sergeants and lieutenants and anybody that could pick up a pencil, they're all writing books anyway. Nobody wants to read anything that I've got to say.
Vicky asks, is Miss Julia looking forward to living in the White House the next 4 years?
Very much. Very much. She wants to completely redecorate it. She says it's a shambles, and it actually is in pretty bad shape. The carpets are all worn out. In fact, Johnson took up some of the carpets and took them with him. It's in pretty rough shape. And Julia says, every time she uses the expression, I simply must, and what follows, I always wince. And I tell her, we're talking about the public money here, my dearest. We're talking about the public money. So I think Julia plans to completely redecorate the White House. She has already told the staff today that from this day forward, they will all wear dress suits and white gloves, dress uniforms and white gloves, which is the first time that that's ever occurred. She says the staff in this house is going to look at a professional staff.
So our final question of the evening, Steve asks, is there a former Confederate adversary you are now close to, and who might that be?
Well, I'm close to several of them. I will give you two. One is Pete Longstreet, James Longstreet. He and I are the best of friends, and he has supported me in my presidency to his great personal detriment. When he went Republican, they were talking about hanging him, and he's alienated so many people in his home state of Georgia and across the South, and combine that with being critical of General Lee at Gettysburg. He's a persona non grata to much of the South, but he's still one of my very best friends, and I will do what I can for him. Someone else that may surprise you that has become a friend is John Mosby, the Gray Ghost. Mosby's Confederacy up there in Virginia. Mosby is an attorney, and right after the war was over, his wife wrote me a letter and said, would you please do something, because my husband is an attorney, and every time he leaves our home, federal forces, troops pick him up and put him in jail. And then he's got to be released by a judge. He can't make a living. We're starving. Can you give us some help? And I wrote a letter that said, sent to the commanding officer in that district there in Virginia. And I said, essentially, leave that man alone. Let him practice law. And I don't want to hear about any further arresting or in any other way harassment of John Mosby. And you know, unto this very day, I have never heard another word about that. In fact, his wife even stopped me and said, "Oh, thank you, General, for what you did." What did I do, dear lady? And she said, "I'm John Mosby's wife. I wrote you a letter. I'd forgotten about it." And she said, "He has become a prosperous attorney. He's been able to return to his practice. And he's even a devotee of you now." And he rumbled a bit about supporting me in the election. And if I should run for election or re-election, uh, he would like to be a key worker for me. So John Mosby, Pete Longstreet.
All right.
And
Well,
regarding my age, I'll be 43 next month. So I'm at 42, I'm the youngest man ever elected president.
thank you so very much, Mr. President, for being with us and answering all of the questions. And ladies